I'm about to show you 5 crazy useful Lightroom tricks that won't make you a better photographer, but they'll make everyone think that you are. And that's all that really matters, right? Hi, I'm PJ and my job is to help you get good at photography fast. So let's not waste time in the intro. Number 1, subject to background brightness. A great portrait, in my opinion, will have a background that is slightly darker than the subject. This is why we so often add in a pop of flash into our shots, so the subject feels like they're jumping out of the frame. But this is not always possible to do on a shoot, so here's how to easily and consistently make it seem like you did it in camera. In the Mask tab, hit Create New Mask and select Background. After a few seconds, you'll see that it's done a pretty good job, but you may have to refine it a little. Personally, I reduced the exposure by about -30 to -40. I think generally speaking, err on the side of subtlety here, don't push it too much. You don't want to start to see the edges of your mask. A small exposure adjustment here can drastically change the balance of your images and how someone perceives you as a photographer. This tip alone will honestly make a huge difference to your work. But wait, we're just getting started. The next tip is going to rock your world. Number 2, soft skin, rough hair. The next tip is to be a bit more thoughtful with the soft and the sharp parts of your images. In most cases, we would like to have a smooth, consistent feel to our skin tones. Most people don't want to look bumpy, blotchy, or shiny, and by keeping our skin smooth and the other areas of our image sharp, we get something called the relative sharpness effect. In the masking tab, select people. After a moment, it will give you a little circle with the face of every person in your shot. Choose your subject or subjects, and then Lightroom will break it down even further. You'll be presented with a list of all the different elements that make up your subject. To start with, we're going to choose facial skin and body skin. Once that mask is created, you're going to slightly reduce the texture and clarity. Clarity is going to remove the mid-tone contrast, the bigger, grittier areas, and texture is going to dial back the fine contrast, what you might call the higher frequency tones. Again, go easy. I find around -10 on each to be the sweet spot here. If you decide to push it a bit and find you're losing a big chunk of color, you can also add back in a tiny bit of saturation or contrast to compensate. This already is looking great, but to make the effect even better without pushing our sliders too far, we are now going to do the exact opposite. Create a new mask, select your person, and then this time choose eyebrows, iris and pupil, lips, hair, facial hair, and clothes. Create the mask and then add in around +10% clarity and texture. Now seeing them together, our smooth areas will feel smoother and our sharp areas will feel a lot sharper. And we haven't added any ugly, unnecessary noise to the parts of our image. This is exactly the sort of intangible effect that can give your photos an effortlessly high production value and make you seem better than you are. Number 3, lines. Switching gears now, wonky lines are the quickest way that I can spot an amateur photographer. Sometimes it's because someone is lazy or their technique is bad, but sometimes it's just unavoidable. So let's pretend to everyone that we take perfectly straight, perfectly balanced images all the time. This shot, for example, was taken with an ultra-wide lens and has some unavoidable distortion towards the edges. So let's start by checking the Enable Profile Corrections box. Most of the time, Lightroom will actually recognize your lens and try its best to actually do all the corrections for you. From here, I usually play with the distortion slider to try and remove the warp from our lines. Once there's no obvious bowing here, grab the guides from the transform panel and click to draw in the lines that you'd like to straighten. I like to try and pick lines that are closer to the edges of my frame. If you think it's still off, you can make small adjustments as well with the horizontal or vertical transform sliders to tweak it a little bit. I also like to squish or drag out the aspect depending on my image. Sometimes that just makes a more pleasing composition to me, especially for architectural stuff like this. Creating a satisfyingly straight or symmetrical photo is one of those things that seems like you just casually took an amazing photo, but in reality, it's almost impossible to do. Number 4, round tripping. Okay, let's take our images on a journey. Sometimes, usually towards the end of your edit, there are some tweaks or adjustments that require a bit of extra firepower. The beauty of working in the Adobe ecosystem is that you can pop in and out of different programs pretty seamlessly. To open the image in Photoshop, the easiest thing to do is to right-click on the thumbnail on the film strip and then click Edit in Adobe Photoshop. Once it opens, you make your adjustments, flatten your image, and then hit Save. This step is really important because you have to hit Save specifically and not Save As, because you have to save it as exactly the same file name and location that it came from. If you do that, then it will actually end up right back in Lightroom on the film strip right next to your original image. It's always best to do this towards the end of your edit, as the image will be saved as a TIFF file as opposed to a RAW or a DNG. Alright, 4.5, the removal list. Here's a little cheeky bonus tip because it's not actually technically a Lightroom trick. Now that you can round trip your images to Photoshop, let me show you my current favorite and what is possibly the easiest retouching tool of all time. The remove tool, keyboard shortcut J, is found underneath the spot healing brush. It is so good now. It covers about 90% of what I used to do with the spot removal and the clone stamp tool combined. Within reason and with a little bit of patience, you can pretty much remove anything you want from your images. If there was ever a cheat code for pro level retouching in your photos, photos, then this is it here. The average person, hell, even the average photographer has no real clue about Photoshop. Learning the remove tool will make you look like a retouching god with virtually no work or prior skill needed. Number 5 is a little bit controversial, but I've seen professional retouchers do this on composite images, and I've incorporated into most of my work too. A little bit of grain to finish off your images can really bring it together. I'm not talking about turning it into a gritty retro film simulation. You want to add just enough texture to make sure that all the elements fit in with one another. This is especially important if you've been masking and editing all the different elements separately. At the moment, I've been liking a very small size and amount of grain, but with the roughness turned up roughly about 3/4. It's just enough to feel it, but not actually see it. Otherwise, if you want a more nostalgic feel, around the 30 mark in size and roughness is a pretty good place to start. Implement any or all of these tricks into your workflow and your normie friends will worship you like the photo god that you are.